The rain didn't just fall, it hammered against the asphalt of the interstate, turning the evening commute into a kaleidoscope of blurred taillights and panic. Inside the sleek silver Porsche Cayenne, Marcus Sterling gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled arrogance. In the back seat, 7-year-old Lily sat in silence, clutching a worn-out teddy bear that smelled like motor oil and peppermint, the smell of her stepfather, Arthur. "Stop crying, Lily," Marcus snapped, glancing at the rearview mirror. "You're going to live in a real house now. No more sleeping in a garage apartment. You're a Sterling. We have standards." Beside the Porsche, in the slow lane, chugged a rusted Ford truck. Arthur sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, maintaining a safe distance. He was following them to the drop-off point, per the court order. He looked nothing like a hero. He wore a faded gray hoodie, grease-stained cargo pants, and a posture that suggested a lifetime of apologies. Then the world ended. A tanker truck 2 lanes over jackknifed on the slick pavement. The screech of metal tearing through metal was deafening, sounding like a chaotic symphony of destruction. The trailer whipped around, clipping the back of the Porsche and sending it spinning across 3 lanes before it slammed into the concrete median. The Ford truck swerved, Arthur's hands moving with a fluid, terrifying precision to avoid the collision, drifting the heavy vehicle into a controlled stop on the shoulder. Silence followed the crash, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the hiss of steam and the distant wail of sirens. Arthur was out of his truck before the engine died. He didn't run. He moved with a low center of gravity, sliding over the wet hood of the Porsche. The driver's side door was crushed. Marcus was screaming inside, a high-pitched, frantic sound. "My leg! My leg! Get me out!" Marcus shrieked, batting at the airbag. He wasn't looking at the back seat. Arthur ignored him. He shattered the rear window with a spring-loaded center punch he pulled from his pocket, the glass cascading like diamonds. He crawled inside. Lily was slumped forward, unconscious. A piece of jagged metal from the door frame had pierced the side of her neck, just missing the jugular, but the blood was dark and flowing fast. A tension pneumothorax was developing. He could hear the sucking sound in her chest. "Don't touch her! You're not her father!" Marcus yelled from the front, trying to twist around, his face a mask of selfish terror. "Wait for the paramedics!" "She has 2 minutes," Arthur said. His voice was different. The stuttering, shy mumble Marcus loved to mock was gone. This voice was cold, flat, and absolute. It was the voice of a man who had negotiated with death 1,000 times. Arthur ripped the sleeve off his own hoodie. He reached into his belt and pulled out a multi-tool. With steady hands that defied the adrenaline of the moment, he clamped the bleeding vessel. But the air in her chest cavity was the real killer. Her lips were turning blue. "I need a tube," Arthur muttered. He scanned the debris. A shattered plastic pen lay on the floor mat. He grabbed it, unscrewed the cap, and emptied the ink cartridge. "What are you doing, you crazy freak? Get away from her!" Marcus screamed. Arthur didn't blink. He palpated Lily's second intercostal space. "Forgive me, Ladybug." With a singular, violent thrust, he inserted the pen casing into her chest. A hiss of escaping air released. Lily gasped, her little chest rising. The color flooded back into her cheeks instantly. Sirens blared as the first ambulance screeched to a halt. A team of paramedics rushed the vehicle. The lead EMT, a veteran named Miller, pushed Arthur aside to assess the girl. He froze. He looked at the improvised chest tube, the precise angle of the insertion, and the clamp on the neck vein that was holding by a fraction of a millimeter. "Who did this?" Miller asked, his voice trembling. "This is a field thoracostomy. Perfect placement. Who stabilized her?" Miller turned around to thank the surgeon, but the man in the grease-stained pants was already walking back to his rusted truck, his head down, blending into the shadows of the rain. "I said, who did this?" Miller shouted over the rain, looking at Marcus. Marcus, clutching his bruised leg, looked bewildered. "The janitor," he scoffed, breathless. "Just the nobody who pays the bills." Miller looked back at the girl, then at the retreating figure. "That wasn't a janitor," he whispered to his partner. "That was a ghost." St. Jude's Trauma Center was a beehive of controlled chaos. The double doors burst open, and the gurney carrying Lily was rushed into Trauma Bay 1. Dr. Aris Thorne, the chief of pediatric surgery, was already scrubbing in, his expression tight. He had heard the radio chatter from the ambulance, something about a roadside procedure that shouldn't have been possible. When Thorne cut away the girl's shirt to expose the injury, his hands paused. The operating room fell silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. Protruding from the child's chest was the casing of a cheap blue ballpoint pen. It was held in place not by tape, but by the tension of the muscle itself, inserted at an angle that defied the frantic shaking of a car crash victim. "Get me the imaging," Thorne barked, though his voice lacked its usual edge. He was staring at the wound. "Did the EMTs do this?"
"No, doctor," said the nurse, hooking up the IV lines. "Report says the stepfather did it before the ambulance arrived." Thorne leaned in closer, adjusting the overhead light. "This isn't first aid," he murmured, more to himself than the team. "This is battlefield triage. Look at the entry point. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. He missed the subclavian artery by less than a millimeter. He didn't just guess. He knew exactly where the anatomy shifted in a 7-year-old versus an adult." "Is she stable?" the anesthesiologist asked. "She's alive because of this pen," Thorne said, finally looking up. If he had waited 5 minutes for the ambulance, the tension pneumothorax would have crushed her heart. This man didn't just save her life, he bought us an hour. Meanwhile, in the hallway, the atmosphere was far less reverence and far more litigious. Marcus Sterling sat in a wheelchair, his leg in a pristine cast, shouting at a weary-looking police officer. "I want him arrested," Marcus spat, waving his phone around. "You saw the damage to my Porsche, and then he attacks my daughter with office supplies? The man is deranged. He's a mechanic, for God's sake. He changes oil. He doesn't perform surgery." Detective Miller, the man who had been first on the scene, leaned against the wall, flipping through a notepad. He looked tired. He had seen a lot of accidents, but the way that man, Arthur, had moved in the rain stuck with him. It wasn't the movement of a hero, it was the movement of a machine. "Mr. Sterling, the doctors say the procedure saved her. Technically, he falls under Good Samaritan laws." "Good Samaritan," Marcus laughed, a harsh barking sound. "He's a high school dropout who mows lawns and fixes carburetors. He's jealous because I have the money and the bloodline. I'm the father. He's just the placeholder. Run his name. You'll find a record, I guarantee it. Drunks always have records." Miller sighed and walked over to the nurse's station, where his partner, Officer Ruiz, was typing on a terminal. "You get anything on Arthur Vance?" Miller asked. Ruiz frowned, tapping the screen with a fingernail. "It's weird, Miller. I ran him through NCIC. No felonies, no misdemeanors, not even a speeding ticket." "Clean?" "Too clean," Ruiz said, lowering his voice. "I tried to pull his tax history to verify employment. The system lagged, and then it gave me a Level 4 access required prompt. Then it just reset to file not found. It's like the guy was born yesterday at the age of 40. Miller looked back through the glass doors of the waiting room. He could see Arthur sitting on a plastic chair in the far corner. He hadn't washed the grease off his hands or the blood off his hoodie. He sat perfectly still, staring at the floor, totally isolated from the chaos around him. He didn't look like a mechanic. In that moment, surrounded by the sterile white of the hospital, Arthur Vance looked like a dormant weapon left in a toy box. "That's not a glitch, Ruiz. That's a scrub. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure Arthur Vance is nobody." Inside the trauma bay, Dr. Thorne carefully removed the pen casing. He held it up to the light, inspecting the tip. It had been beveled. The man had used a rock or concrete to sharpen the plastic into a needle point before insertion. Thorne dropped the pen into a metal tray with a clatter. "Who the hell is this guy?" 3 weeks later, the rain had stopped, but the gray clouds still hung low over the industrial district of East End. Arthur's home wasn't a house. It was a converted loft above Sal's Auto Repair. It smelled permanently of brake fluid and stale coffee, a scent that most people would find suffocating, but to Arthur it was the smell of anonymity. He stood at the small kitchenette, stirring a pot of boxed macaroni and cheese. The burner clicked rhythmically, a broken sound he couldn't afford to fix.
His hands, the same hands that had performed a field thoracostomy with a ballpoint pen, were now scrubbing grease out from under his fingernails with a rough bristle brush. He scrubbed until the skin was raw, trying to wash away the memory of the blood. "Artie?" a small voice called from the living area. "Yeah, Bug, you hungry?" Arthur asked, his voice soft, returning to the gentle, slightly hesitant cadence he used with everyone. "I can't get the purple to work," she said, holding up a broken crayon. "It snapped." Arthur knelt. He took the 2 pieces of wax. For a split second, his eyes narrowed, calculating the melting point of the wax, the pressure needed to fuse them, the precise angle of application. It was an instinct from a life where fixing things meant improvising explosives or setting bones in the dark. He shook his head, clearing the thought. "We can fix it," he said, grabbing a piece of Scotch tape. He wrapped it clumsily around the crayon. It was a messy, ugly repair. "There, good as, well, good enough." She giggled. "You're bad at crafts." "I know," he smiled. "That's why I fix cars. Engines don't care if you're messy."
He sat on the floor with her, ignoring the ache in his knees. This was the life he had chosen, the humble life. No missions, no extraction points, just macaroni, broken crayons, and a 7-year-old girl who looked at him like he hung the moon, even if society looked at him like he was the dirt under its boot. He picked up her drawing. It was a picture of the accident. A black scribbled storm, a silver car, and a giant stick figure standing over a smaller one. The giant figure wasn't scary. It was glowing yellow. "Is this me?" Arthur asked, a lump forming in his throat. "That's the knight," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He stopped the bad air from taking me." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. She remembered. The doctor said she might not due to the shock, but she remembered. "That wasn't a knight, Lily," Arthur said quietly. "That was just luck. Just lucky." "Daddy Marcus says you're just a grease monkey," Lily said, not with malice, but with the innocent repetition of a child. "He says you're going to be in trouble for poking me." Arthur stiffened. "Marcus is upset. He loves you, and he was scared." "He wasn't scared for me," Lily whispered, looking down at her drawing. "He was scared for his leg. You were the one who was scared for me." Arthur reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand hovered over the scar on her chest. He wanted to trace it, to apologize for the pain, but he pulled back. He couldn't let himself be that man again, the man who acted. That man had enemies. That man put people in danger just by existing. Suddenly, the apartment shook as a heavy knock pounded on the metal door downstairs. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was the rhythmic, authoritative pounding of a process server, or worse. Arthur stood up, his movement fluid and silent for just a second before he remembered to slouch, to drag his feet, to be the tired mechanic. He walked to the window and peered through the grime. A black sedan was parked next to his rusted truck. Not police, private security. "Stay here, Lily," Arthur said. "Stir the mac and cheese for me." He walked to the door, his heart rate steady at 45 beats per minute, while his mind began to catalog the exits he hoped he wouldn't have to use. The piece was over. Arthur opened the metal door at the bottom of the stairs, the cool, damp air of the alley rushing in to meet the smell of oil. Standing there was a man in a suit that cost more than Arthur made in a year. He held a manila envelope, his expression of one of practiced disdain. "Arthur Vance?" the man asked, looking Arthur up and down, his eyes lingering on the grease stains on Arthur's cargo pants. "Who's asking?" Arthur replied, his voice rough, eyes downcast. He leaned against the doorframe, projecting the image of a man worn down by life, not a man assessing the suit's center of mass. "I'm serving you," the man said, thrusting the envelope towards Arthur's chest. "Custody modification hearing. Mr. Sterling is filing for full exclusivity. He's petitioning to revoke your visitation rights entirely." Arthur took the envelope. It felt heavy, like a brick. "On what grounds? I haven't missed a payment. I haven't missed a visit." The server smirked. "On the grounds of reckless endangerment. The incident on the highway.
Mr. Sterling's lawyers are arguing that you performed an unauthorized, dangerous medical procedure on a minor without parental consent. They're calling it assault. Arthur felt a cold fire ignite in his gut. I saved her life. That's for a judge to decide, the man said, turning to walk back to the black sedan. He paused and looked back. Mr. Sterling also wanted me to remind you that his new security team will be present at all future exchanges. He doesn't want you near the house, or the girl. For her safety, of course. Arthur watched the car drive away. He didn't crumble. He didn't shout. He stood perfectly still, his breathing shallow. Assault. Saving a child from suffocating on her own blood was assault. He walked back upstairs. Lily was at the stove, stirring the macaroni with intense concentration. The sight of her broke the tension in his shoulders. He tossed the envelope onto the cluttered counter, face down. "Dinner's ready," she chirped. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The loft was cozy in the evenings, lit with warm yellow lamps that hid the cracks in the walls. "Are you sad?" Lily asked, poking a noodle with her fork. "Just tired, Bug," Arthur lied. "Grown-up stuff." "Is it because of the man in the suit?" Arthur looked at her. She was too observant, too smart. "Yeah, he brought some paperwork. Boring stuff." Lily put her fork down. "Daddy Marcus yelled at Mommy on the phone today. I heard him."
Arthur stopped chewing. Lily's mother, Sarah, had passed away 2 years ago. Marcus had remarried quickly, a socialite named Veronica who tolerated Lily at best. But Marcus still referred to Sarah when he wanted to manipulate the narrative. "What did he say?" "He said that you're dangerous," Lily whispered. "He said you're a stray dog, and that stray dogs bite." Arthur closed his eyes. The insult didn't hurt. He had been called worse by better men. What hurt was that Marcus was poisoning Lily's perception of him. He was turning the protector into the monster. "Lily, look at me." She looked up, her big eyes swimming with confusion. "I am not dangerous to you. I will never hurt you. You know that, right?" "I know," she said, nodding vigorously. "You fixed me, with the pen." "We don't talk about the pen," Arthur said, gently but firmly. "That's our secret, okay?" "Okay." Later that night, after tucking Lily into the makeshift bed on the pull-out couch, Arthur sat at his small workbench. He turned on a single lamp. He opened the manila envelope. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was clear. Marcus was using his wealth and influence to crush Arthur. He wasn't just trying to take Lily, he was trying to erase Arthur. Arthur opened a locked drawer at the bottom of the workbench. Inside lay a small, battered tin box. He opened it. There were no guns, no knives, just a faded photograph of a military unit in the desert, faces blurred by sand and time, and a single dog tag. It didn't have a name. It just had a serial number and a blood type, O negative. He ran his thumb over the metal. "I promised Sarah I'd keep her safe," he whispered to the empty room. "I promised I'd leave the life behind." But the life was coming for him, not in the form of insurgents or assassins, but in the form of lawyers and court orders. And for the first time in years, Arthur didn't know if his particular set of skills could save him. You can't snap a subpoena's neck. You can't ambush a custody hearing. He closed the box and locked it. He had to try the legal way. He had to be the humble man. He had to swallow his pride, bow his head, and let Marcus win every battle, as long as he didn't lose the war for Lily's heart. But as he looked at the sleeping girl, he knew one thing for certain. If Marcus Sterling hurt her, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, the humble man would vanish, and the ghost would return. The mediation room smelled of lemon polish and aggressive cologne. It was a small, windowless box designed to force compromise, but there would be no compromise today. On one side of the mahogany table sat Marcus Sterling, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they were carved out of marble and malice.
On the other side sat Arthur, wearing a charcoal suit he'd bought at a thrift store. It was too tight across the shoulders and too loose at the waist, making him look like a child playing dress-up. "Mr. Vance," the mediator began, a weary woman named Mrs. Gable, "Mr. Sterling's counsel has presented a compelling case for emergency temporary custody. They're citing your living conditions and the incident." "It wasn't an incident," Arthur said, his voice low. He kept his hands clasped on the table, forcing them to remain relaxed. "It was a life-saving measure." "It was mutilation," Marcus snapped, leaning forward. His leg was propped up on a chair, the cast covered by a custom-made suit leg. "The doctors said she could have gotten an infection, sepsis." "The doctors said she would have been dead if I hadn't," Arthur replied, looking Marcus in the eye. "That's speculation," one of the lawyers interjected smoothly. "What isn't speculation is that you're an unlicensed individual performing invasive surgery. It speaks to a savior complex, delusions of grandeur. It suggests you're mentally unfit to care for a minor." Arthur felt a muscle in his jaw twitch. Savior complex. If only they knew. He didn't want to save anyone. He just wanted to be left alone. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, sliding a thick file across the table, "we've been trying to verify your background, Mr. Vance. It's concerning." Arthur's heart rate didn't change, but his pupils contracted slightly. "Concerning how?" "It's empty," Marcus laughed, a cruel, incredulous sound. "You have no college records, no trade school certification. Your employment history before 5 years ago is non-existent. You just appeared in this town, started dating Sarah, and leeched off her. You're a drifter, Arthur, a nobody." The lawyer tapped the file. "We believe you may have hiding a criminal past. We have a private investigator running a deep dive as we speak. If you have any outstanding warrants, any debts, any skeletons, we will find them. And when we do, we won't just take Lily. We'll put you in prison." Arthur looked at the file. The emptiness wasn't a lack of history. It was a firewall, a level 9 redaction. If a private investigator dug too deep, they wouldn't find warrants.
They would trigger a silent alarm at the Pentagon. They would wake up sleeping dogs that would bite everyone in this room. "I have no record," Arthur said softly. "I'm just a mechanic." "You're a liability," Marcus spat. "Look at you. You can't even afford a decent suit. You live above a garage. You smell like oil. You think a judge is going to let Lily stay with you? I can give her the world. You can give her, what, macaroni and cheese?" The mediator cleared her throat. "Given the pending investigation into Mr. Vance's background and the medical trauma, I am inclined to grant the temporary emergency order. Visitation is suspended until the psychological evaluation is complete." The words hit Arthur like a sniper round. Suspended. "You can't do that," Arthur whispered. "She needs me. She has nightmares about the crash. I'm the only one who can calm her down." "She has nightmares because of you," Marcus yelled, "because you poked a hole in her." Marcus stood up, grabbing his cane. He leaned over the table, his face inches from Arthur's. "Walk away, Arthur," Marcus hissed, his voice dropping so only they could hear. "Go back to being a nobody. If you fight me, I will spend every dollar I have to destroy you. I will make sure you never see her again. You're playing a game you can't afford." Arthur looked at Marcus's neck. He saw the pulse of the carotid artery. He knew exactly how much pressure it would take to stop it. It would take less than 2 seconds. Arthur took a deep breath. He unclasped his hands. He stood up, picked up his folder, and looked at the mediator. "I'll comply with the evaluation," Arthur said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "But tell your investigator to be careful where he digs." "Is that a threat?" the lawyer asked, pen poised. "No," Arthur said, turning to the door. "It's safety advice."
The silence in the loft above Sal's auto repair was heavier than the industrial machinery downstairs. For 3 days, Arthur had been a ghost in his own home. He hadn't touched the half-finished engine block on his workbench. He hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. He just sat in the worn leather armchair, staring at the digital clock, waiting for 7 p.m. The court order, despite suspending visitation, mandated a 10-minute nightly phone call. It was the only lifeline he had left to Lily. At 6:59 p.m., Arthur dialed the number. His hand didn't shake, but his chest felt tight, like he was back in a high-altitude jump plane, waiting for the green light.
It rang 3 times. Then the line clicked open. Hello? It wasn't Lily. It was Marcus. Put her on, Arthur said, his voice gravel. She's occupied, Marcus replied, his tone dripping with casual victory. She's having a lesson, etiquette coach. We're trying to undo the rustic habits she picked up living in a garage. It's 7 p.m., Marcus. The judge signed the order. 10 minutes. Sue me, Marcus chuckled. Oh, wait, you are, and you're losing. Listen, Vance, I'm doing you a favor. She's crying less today. She's forgetting you. It's better this way. Rip the bandage off. She's 7. She's not a bandage. She's a Sterling, Marcus corrected. By the way, we did some spring cleaning. That bear, the one that smelled like brake fluid, it was a biohazard. I had the maid toss it in the incinerator. Arthur gripped the phone so hard the plastic casing creaked. That bear was the last thing Lily had of her mother's scent, mixed with his own. It was her anchor during storms. You threw away her bear? Arthur asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I upgraded her. She has a hypoallergenic silk rabbit now, imported, much better quality, just like her new father. The line went dead. Arthur slowly lowered the phone. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, not a scream, but a growl. He stood up and swept the entire contents of his kitchen table onto the floor. Plates shattered. The salt shaker exploded. He stood amidst the debris, breathing hard, his hands balled into fists. The urge to drive to the Sterling estate, breach the perimeter, and dismantle Marcus bone by bone was overwhelming. It would be easy. Tactical entry was his specialty. But that would prove Marcus right. That would make him the monster. He needed air. Arthur walked out of the loft, down the metal stairs, and into the cool night. He walked aimlessly through the industrial park, the sodium streetlights buzzing overhead. He needed to burn off the adrenaline before it turned into violence. He was 2 blocks away when he felt it, the sensation of eyes on the back of his neck. It was a sixth sense honed in the mountains of Kandahar and the alleys of Beirut. He didn't turn around. He kept walking, checking his reflection in the darkened windows of a warehouse. A gray sedan was creeping along the curb, lights off. Arthur turned a corner into a dead-end alley behind a textile factory. He stopped behind a dumpster and waited. 10 seconds later, a man in a rumpled trench coat turned the corner, holding a camera with a telephoto lens. Arthur moved. He didn't run. He simply appeared. One moment he was hidden. The next he was behind the man, his arm locked around the man's windpipe in a sleeper hold. Not tight enough to kill, just enough to terrify. "Drop the camera," Arthur whispered in the man's ear. The camera clattered to the pavement. Arthur released him and shoved him against the brick wall. It was the private investigator Marcus's lawyers had hired, a cheap sleuth named Gorman. I have a license," Gorman stammered, clutching his throat. "You assault me, and you're done." Arthur kicked the camera, shattering the lens. He stepped in close, invading Gorman's personal space. "You're digging, Gorman. I know you are." "I'm just doing a job," Gorman squeaked. "But, hey, look, man to man, your file is weird." Arthur paused. "Explain."
I tried to pull your birth certificate from the county archives in Oregon where you said you were born. It's not there. But it's not missing. It's redacted. And then my computer crashed, hard drive wiped, totally fried. Gorman looked up at Arthur, fear replacing his bravado. Who are you? Regular people don't have malware protecting their birth certificates. Arthur leaned in. I'm a mechanic, and you're going to report back to Sterling that I'm clean, boring, a dead end. And if I don't, then the next time your computer crashes, Arthur said, his eyes void of any light, you'll be sitting in front of it. He turned and walked away, leaving Gorman shivering in the alley. Arthur knew he had bought some time, but the walls were closing in, the system was failing him, and Marcus had taken the bear. The escalation had begun. Arthur stood outside the chain-link fence of St. Jude's Preparatory, the collar of his coat turned up against the biting wind. He was 300 yards away, hidden within the tree line of the adjacent park. To a passerby, he was just a vagrant seeking shelter. To a trained eye, he was static surveillance. The dismissal bell rang. A parade of luxury SUVs and sedans idled in the pickup lane. Arthur's eyes scanned the crowd of uniformed children until he locked onto her, Lily. She looked different. Her wild, curly hair, which she usually refused to brush, was pulled back to a severe, tight bun. Her uniform was pristine, lacking the usual grass stains she'd acquire by lunch. But it was her walk that shattered him. She didn't skip. She trudged, her head down, clutching a pristine white rabbit that looked stiff and uncomfortable in her grip. She dragged its silk ears through a puddle and didn't even notice. A nanny Arthur didn't recognize, a stern woman in a gray suit, hustled Lily into the back of the silver Porsche. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Arthur's chest. He didn't wave. He couldn't risk her seeing him and running. That would only give Marcus more ammunition for the instability argument in court. He turned and walked away, his boots heavy on the gravel path. When he arrived back at Sal's Auto Repair, the garage bay doors were closed. It was 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. They should have been wide open, the air filled with the sound of pneumatic drills and classic rock. Instead, a heavy padlock hung on the hasp. Arthur keyed himself into the side door and walked into the shop. It was silent. Sal, the owner, a man with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints and a heart of gold, was sitting on a stack of tires, his head in his hands. "Sal? What's going on? Power go out?" Sal looked up. His eyes were red. He looked 20 years older than he had that morning. "It's over, Artie. We're done." "What are you talking about? We have 3 transmissions to rebuild by Friday." Sal stood up and shoved a piece of paper into Arthur's chest. "Not anymore. The bank called the loan. Immediate repayment clause activated. I was late one time 3 years ago, and they used it." Arthur scanned the document. It was legal, but it was aggressive, predatory. Then he saw the acquisition notice attached to the back. The property wasn't going to auction. It had already been sold to a holding company, Sterling Real Estate Ventures. "He bought the building," Arthur whispered. "They gave me 24 hours to vacate," Sal said, wiping his nose with a dirty rag. "They're bulldozing it, Artie. Said they want to build a green space, a park."
Arthur felt a coldness spread through his limbs that had nothing to do with the temperature. Marcus wasn't just fighting for custody, he was systematically dismantling Arthur's existence. He was taking his daughter, his home, and now his job. He was stripping away every layer of the humble life Arthur had built. "I'm sorry, kid," Sal said, pulling a wad of cash from his pocket. "This is everything in the register. It's your severance. You're the best mechanic I ever saw. You can fix anything." "I can't fix this," Arthur said, refusing the money. "Keep it, Sal. You need it more than I do." "Where will you go?" Sal asked, looking up at the loft where Arthur lived. "You lose the apartment, too." "I know," Arthur said. "Artie, who did you piss off? People like Sterling don't buy dumpy garages in the East End for green spaces. This is personal." Arthur looked around the shop. This had been his sanctuary, the place where he learned to be a civilian again, the place where he learned that broken things could be mended with patience, not violence. "I tried to be a father," Arthur said quietly. "Apparently, that's an offense punishable by erasure." "What are you going to do?" Arthur walked over to his workbench. He picked up his tool roll, leather, hand-oiled, organized with obsessive precision. He rolled it up and tucked it under his arm. "I'm going to find a place to sleep," Arthur said, "and then I'm going to find a lawyer who isn't afraid of sharks." He walked out of the garage for the last time. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, his phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "Just a heads up, I also flagged your driver's license for review due to medical instability. Don't drive that truck tonight. Uber is safer. M." Arthur looked at his truck. A police cruiser was already idling down the block, waiting. Marcus was boxing him in, cornering him. And every hunter knows that a cornered animal is the most dangerous thing on earth. But Marcus didn't think he was hunting an animal. He thought he was kicking a stray dog. Arthur turned his collar up, put his head down, and started walking into the rain. He was homeless, jobless, pedestrian. Perfect. The Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city cost $58 a night. It smelled of bleach and despair. Arthur sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, cleaning the small cuts on his knuckles with hydrogen peroxide. His reflection in the cracked mirror showed a man eroding. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with dark circles. He looked exactly like what Marcus said he was, a derelict. He had spent the day at the public library using a guest computer to search for legal aid. Every door slammed shut. The moment he gave his social security number, the lawyer's eyes glazed over. "Conflict of interest," they said, or "we can't take cases with this level of complexity." Marcus had blacklisted him, not just locally, but systemically. Arthur stood up and paced the small room. He needed to see her, just once. He needed to know she was safe. The silence from the phone was deafening. He waited until 2 a.m. He put on his dark hoodie and the black boots he had worn in places that didn't exist on maps. He walked the 5 miles to the Sterling estate, sticking to the shadows, moving through the drainage ditches and wooded buffers that separated the wealthy from the rest of the world. The estate was a fortress, high stone walls, wrought iron gates, and cameras every 50 feet. Arthur didn't go to the gate. He circled to the east perimeter, where an old oak tree's branches hung over the wall. He scaled the tree with silent, effortless grace, dropping into the manicured garden without snapping a twig. He moved toward the house, avoiding the motion sensor lights by tracking their sweep patterns. He knew the layout. He had picked Lily up from here 100 times in the driveway, never allowed inside. He reached the trellis beneath Lily's second-story window. He didn't climb it. He just stood in the shadows of the hydrangeas, looking up. The nightlight was on. He could see the silhouette of the new silk rabbit sitting on the windowsill. It looked stiff, unloved. Suddenly, a floodlight blinded him. "Don't move," a voice barked. Arthur froze. He raised his hand slowly. He wasn't surprised by the security. He was surprised by the aggression. 3 men stepped out of the darkness. They weren't wearing standard security guard uniforms. They wore tactical vests and carried batons that crackled with electricity. "On the ground, now." Arthur calculated the odds. 3 targets, distance 6 feet. He could disable the leader, use him as a shield, and break the kneecaps of the flankers. Total time, 4 seconds. But then what? He'd be a fugitive, a violent felon. He would never see Lily again. Arthur slowly sank to his knees, interlacing his fingers behind his head. "I'm unarmed," he said calmly. "I just wanted to check on my daughter."
"Wrong answer, trespasser," the leader grunted. The blow came hard, a baton strike to the kidney. Arthur didn't scream, but the air left his lungs in a rush. He collapsed to the gravel. They kicked him, ribs, thighs, shoulders. It was a professional beating, designed to inflict maximum pain without breaking bones or leaving lethal marks. Arthur curled into a ball, protecting his head, absorbing the punishment. He let them beat him. He took every kick as penance for failing her. "Enough," a voice commanded from the patio. The kicking stopped. Arthur gasped for air, tasting copper in his mouth. He looked up through a swollen eye. Marcus stood on the terrace, wearing a silk robe, sipping a glass of amber liquid. He looked down at Arthur with a mixture of disgust and delight. "I told you not to come here," Marcus said, swirling his drink. "Now you're trespassing, stalking, resisting arrest. My team is well within their rights to neutralize a threat." Arthur spat blood onto the pristine white gravel. "Is she happy?" he wheezed. Marcus laughed softly. "Happy? She's a child, Arthur. She adapts, especially when the toxic element is removed." Marcus took a sip of his drink and smiled. "Besides, she won't be here to miss you much longer." Arthur tried to push himself up, but a boot on his back pinned him down. What do you mean?" "I'm sending her away," Marcus said casually. "Switzerland, L'Institut Le Rosey. It's the most exclusive boarding school in the world. Very strict. No phones, no internet, and certainly no visitation from greasy mechanics. The plane leaves tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. The world stopped spinning. Switzerland. He was exiling her, sending a traumatized 7-year-old halfway across the world to a place where she would know no one. "You can't," Arthur rasped. "She's terrified of flying since the crash. You can't put her on a plane alone." "I can do whatever I want," Marcus sneered. "I'm her father. You're just the stain on the driveway. Get him out of here. Dump him outside the city limits." As the guards dragged Arthur away, his boots scraping against the gravel, something inside him finally shattered. The humble man, the one who scrubbed grease, ate mac and cheese, and followed the rules, died on that driveway. Marcus had made a fatal error. He thought he had broken a man. Instead, he had unlocked a weapon. The ditch was wet, smelling of decaying leaves and roadside runoff. Arthur lay face down in the mud for a full minute, listening to the receding hum of the security SUV's engine. He catalogued his injuries with the detached clinical detachment of a field medic. 2 fractured ribs on the left side, a contusion on the right kidney, swollen left orbital, a deep laceration on his lower lip.
Pain was present, but it was distant. It was a signal, not a master. Arthur pushed himself up. His hands sank into the muck, but his grip was iron. He stood, swaying slightly until his equilibrium recalibrated. He checked his watch. The crystal cracked, but the digital display still glowing green. 03:15 a.m. The flight to Switzerland departed at 8 a.m. He had less than 5 hours to traverse the city, breach the security of a private airfield, and stop a man who owned the police force. He began to walk. He didn't head back to the motel. He headed toward the industrial district, 3 miles south. He moved with a limping, predatory cadence, ignoring the rain that washed the blood from his face. He wasn't Arthur the mechanic anymore. He was an asset that had been dormant for 5 years. He arrived at U-Storet, a facility of rusted orange doors and flickering lights. He hopped the fence, landing heavily but silently. He walked to Unit 117. He didn't have a key. He knelt by the padlock, pulled a tension wrench made from a piece of stiff wire from his pocket, and picked the lock in 6 seconds. The door rolled up with a groan of neglected metal. Inside, under a dusty tarp, sat a Ducati Diavel, matte black, its battery likely dead, but next to it was a heavy, waterproof Pelican case. Arthur dragged the case to the center of the concrete floor. He popped the latches. The air inside the case smelled of sterile preservation. Inside lay the remnants of a life he had buried to be with Sarah. There were stacks of currency, euros, dollars, yen. There were passports with different names, but the same eyes. And at the bottom, a garment bag and a laptop that looked like a brick. Arthur stripped off his wet, muddy clothes. He used a bottle of water from the cache to wash the blood off his torso. He looked at his reflection in the Ducati's side mirror. The bruising was purple and ugly, but his eyes were cold, clear. He opened the garment bag. Inside was a suit,
Not the ill-fitting thrift store polyester he had worn to mediation. This was a bespoke charcoal suit, cut in Savile Row, designed to conceal a sidearm and allow for full range of motion. He put on the white shirt, the silk tie, the jacket. He buttoned it. It fit like armor. He sat on the floor and opened the laptop. He placed his thumb on the biometric scanner. Access granted. Welcome, Colonel Vance.
The screen populated with global data streams. Arthur ignored them. He began typing with furious speed. He bypassed the local firewalls and accessed the FAA flight plans for the private sector. Target identified. Gulfstream G650. Tail number N774ST. Owner, Sterling Corp. Scheduled departure, 08 a.m. Destination, Geneva. He had the target. Now he needed the leverage. Arthur opened a new window. He navigated to a server that didn't officially exist. He entered a sequence of codes that he had memorized a lifetime ago. The screen flashed red. Warning, unauthorized access to classified judicial archives. He typed in an override code. Override auth, Omega 7. The screen turned green. "Let's see who you really are, Marcus," Arthur whispered. He initiated a deep dive search on Marcus Sterling's financials, cross-referencing them with international watch lists. It took 3 minutes. The results scrolled down the screen. Shell companies, offshore accounts in the Caymans, and then the smoking gun. A direct wire transfer from a sanctioned entity in Eastern Europe, disguised as a consulting fee for his real estate firm. Marcus wasn't just a bully. He was laundering money. Arthur pulled a USB drive from the case and downloaded the file. He had the weapon. Now he needed to get to the battlefield. He turned his attention to the motorcycle. He connected a portable jump starter from the case. The engine turned over once, twice, then roared to life, a deep, aggressive growl that shook the dust from the ceiling. Arthur put on a black helmet with a tinted visor. He slipped the USB drive into his breast pocket. He checked his watch, 04:45 a.m. He rolled the bike out into the rain. The humble mechanic was gone. The man riding out of Unit 117 was the man who toppled regimes, and he was coming for his daughter. The Sterling Private Aviation Terminal was a gleaming expanse of glass and steel, isolated from the common rabble of the main airport. At 07:30 a.m., the rain had thinned to a freezing mist that coated the runway in a slick sheen. On the tarmac, the Gulfstream G650 whined, its turbines spinning up. A black SUV idled near the stairs. Marcus Sterling stood by the open door, checking his watch with agitated jerks of his wrist. "Stop crying, Lily," Marcus shouted over the engine noise. "You are embarrassing yourself. The pilot is waiting." Lily stood at the bottom of the metal stairs, refusing to take the first step. She was trembling so violently that the oversized coat she wore seemed to vibrate. She looked at the open maw of the plane door like it was the mouth of a monster. "I want Artie," she sobbed, her voice small and broken. "Artie is gone," Marcus snapped, grabbing her arm. "He's in a ditch where he belongs. Now move." He dragged her up the first step. She screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure terror. At the perimeter gate, half a mile away, 2 armed security guards sat in a heated booth drinking coffee. They watched the monitors lazily. "Hey," one guard said, squinting at the road camera. "What is that?" On the screen, a black blur was tearing down the access road. It wasn't slowing down for the checkpoint. "He's not stopping," the guard yelled, slamming his hand on the emergency button. "Bollards! Raise the bollards!" The hydraulic steel posts began to rise from the pavement, but they were too slow.
The Ducati Diavel, moving at 120 miles per hour, swerved with impossible precision. The rider leaned the bike so low his knee scraped the asphalt, threading the needle between the rising steel pillars with inches to spare. The bike didn't decelerate, it accelerated. The roar of the engine reached the tarmac before the bike did. Marcus looked up, irritated. What is that noise? The security team by the SUV, the same men who had beaten Arthur hours earlier, drew their weapons. Intruder! Breach on the north runway! The Ducati exploded onto the tarmac, fishtailing on the wet concrete before correcting into a straight line of pure velocity. It was heading straight for the plane. "Shoot him!" Marcus screamed. "Shoot the tires!" A guard raised his rifle, but the rider was too fast, weaving in a serpentine pattern that made targeting impossible. At the last possible second, the rider slammed the brakes, the bike drifted sideways, tires screaming, sliding 100 feet before coming to a halt directly between the SUV and the stairs of the plane. The rider kicked the kickstand down and dismounted in one fluid motion. He didn't look like a mechanic. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than the guards' annual salaries combined. He reached up and unclipped his helmet.
Arthur Vance pulled the helmet off and dropped it on the wet tarmac. His face was a map of violence, one eye swollen shut, lips split, jaw bruised purple. But his good eye burned with a cold, terrifying intelligence. "Step away from the girl," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the whine of the jet engines like a razor. "You?" Marcus stared, his mouth hanging open. "You're supposed to be broken." "I was," Arthur said, taking a step forward. "Then you threatened my daughter." "Kill him!" Marcus shrieked at his guards. "He's armed! He's dangerous!" The 3 guards hesitated. They looked at the man in the suit. They looked at the way he stood, relaxed, hands loose at his sides, weight balanced. They recognized the stance. It wasn't the stance of a brawler. It was the stance of an operator. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away," Arthur said to the guards, ignoring Marcus entirely. "You're private security. You're paid to protect assets, not kidnap children. Walk away, and you keep your knees." "Take him down!" the lead guard shouted, rushing forward with his baton raised. Arthur didn't flinch. He stepped into the swing, parrying the arm with his left hand and driving his right palm into the guard's solar plexus. The guard folded instantly, gasping for air. Arthur spun, sweeping the leg of the second attacker, sending him crashing onto the concrete. The third guard fumbled for his taser. Arthur snatched it from his hand, disassembled the cartridge with a snap of his wrist, and tossed it aside. It took 6 seconds. 3 men down. Arthur hadn't even unbuttoned his jacket. He walked to the bottom of the stairs. Marcus backed up, dragging Lily with him, using her as a shield. "Stay back," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. I'll tell the pilot to take off. You can't touch me. I am Marcus Sterling." Arthur looked up at Lily. Her eyes were wide, staring at him. "Hi, Ladybug," Arthur said softly, ignoring the blood running down his chin. "I told you I'd fix it." "You're dead, Vance," Marcus spat, pulling a small revolver from his coat pocket. He pointed it shakily at Arthur's chest. "You're trespassing on federal property. I can shoot you in self-defense." The whine of sirens filled the air. Police cruisers were swarming the runway, blue and red lights reflected off the wet pavement. "Drop the weapon," a police megaphone boomed. "Everyone down." "He's crazy," Marcus screamed at the police, not lowering the gun. "He attacked my security. He's trying to kidnap my daughter." Detective Miller, the officer from the crash site weeks ago, stepped out from behind a cruiser. He held up a hand, signaling his men to hold fire. "Arthur," Miller called out, his voice calm, "don't move. Let us handle this."
"He's leaving with her," Arthur said, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "He's putting an undocumented minor on an international flight to a non-extradition canton. That's trafficking." "She's my daughter!" Marcus yelled. "Is she?" Arthur reached into his jacket pocket. "He's reaching!" a rookie cop shouted. "Hold fire!" Miller roared. Arthur pulled out the USB drive. He held it up between two fingers. "Marcus Sterling is laundering money for the Vori Vizacone crime syndicate. This drive contains the ledger, wire transfers, offshore shell accounts, and the names of the politicians he's bribed to look the other way." Marcus's face went pale. "Lies! He's lying!" "Plug it in," Arthur said, tossing the drive toward Miller. It skittered across the wet pavement and stopped at the detective's feet. "Folder 3. Look at the transaction dated yesterday. $5 million from a sanctioned Russian account. The consulting fee." Miller picked up the drive. He looked at Marcus. "Mr. Sterling, put the gun down. We need to verify this." "You're going to listen to a mechanic?" Marcus shrieked in the night air. "I own this city." "You own nothing," Arthur said, taking a slow step up the stairs. "The bank seized your assets at 8 a.m. this morning. I triggered the alert to the SEC 5 minutes ago."
Your accounts are frozen, Marcus. Your cards are dead. Your plane isn't going anywhere because you can't pay for the fuel. Marcus looked at the pilot in the cockpit window. The pilot, listening to the radio, shook his head and cut the engines. The turbines whined down into silence. "It's over," Arthur said. "Let her go." Marcus looked at Lily. He looked at the gun. He looked at the police closing in. The facade of the powerful billionaire crumbled. He wasn't a titan. He was a cornered rat. "If I go down," Marcus hissed, pointing the gun at Lily's head, "I'm taking the only thing you care about." The air left the tarmac. The police froze. Miller lowered his weapon, terrified of startling him. But Arthur didn't freeze. He had been waiting for this. The micro-expression on Marcus's face, the twitch of the orbicularis oculi muscle, signaled the intent before the action. Arthur moved. It wasn't human speed, it was a blur. He lunged up the stairs, closing the 6-foot gap in a fraction of a second. His left hand chopped Marcus's wrist, sending the revolver spinning into the air. His right hand grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his cashmere coat. Arthur didn't hit him. He slammed him backward against the metal railing of the stairs. The breath left Marcus in a whoosh. Arthur spun Marcus around and pinned him against the fuselage, arm barred behind his back. "Don't look, Lily," Arthur said gently. Lily buried her face in her hands. Arthur leaned into Marcus's ear. "You threatened a child, you betrayed your country, and you broke my favorite crayon." Arthur swept Marcus's legs, driving him face first into the metal stairs. He placed a knee on Marcus's back and looked at the police. "He's all yours, detective." Miller and 4 officers rushed up the stairs. They cuffed Marcus, who was sobbing now, incoherent pleas for a lawyer bubbling from his lips. Arthur stood up. He straightened his tie. He wiped a smudge of blood from his cheek. He turned to Lily. She was shaking, her eyes squeezed shut. "Hey," he whispered. "Bug." She opened her eyes. She looked at the man in the suit, the man who looked scary but smelled like peppermint and rain. "Artie?" "I'm here," he said. "Nobody is taking you anywhere." She launched herself at him. Arthur caught her, lifting her up. She wrapped her legs around his waist and buried her face in his neck, sobbing. He held her tight, his hand cradling the back of her head, shielding her from the flashing lights and the cameras that were starting to arrive. He walked down the stairs, carrying her. He walked past the stunned police officers. He walked past the handcuffed billionaire. He walked until he reached the edge of the tarmac, where the noise of the sirens faded into the background. Miller caught up to him. "Arthur, you can't just leave. There are questions. Who are you, really?" Arthur looked at Miller. He looked at the USB drive in his hand. "I'm just a stepdad, and I'm late for a mac and cheese dinner."
The fallout of the Sterling tarmac incident was less of a news cycle and more of a demolition. For 48 hours, the face of Marcus Sterling was plastered on every screen in America, not as the philanthropic real estate mogul, but as the money launderer for the Vori Vosicone. The USB drive Arthur had thrown to Detective Miller hadn't just contained a ledger, it contained a map of corruption that toppled 3 state senators and a federal judge. But in the quiet, wood-paneled sanctuary of Family Courtroom 4B, the media storm felt miles away. Arthur sat at the plaintiff's table. He was back in his humble clothes, a clean flannel shirt and jeans, having burned the bespoke suit. Lily sat on a bench behind him, coloring in a new book, guarded by Detective Miller, who had taken a personal interest in the case. Opposite them, Marcus's chair was empty. He was being held without bail in a federal supermax facility, deemed a high flight risk. Instead, a court-appointed attorney sat there, looking exhausted and defeated, shuffling papers that meant nothing. "Mr. Vance, Your Honor," said Judge Holloway, peering over her spectacles. She looked tired. "While Mr. Sterling's criminal activities are extensive and certainly disqualify him from custody, the court still has reservations about you." Arthur stood up slowly. "Your Honor, you have no home," the judge listed, tapping a file. "You have no employment, as your previous place of work has been seized. You have no verified income, and, according to the police report, you hospitalized 4 armed security guards with your bare hands in under 10 seconds.
The state is concerned that you are unstable. A violent drifter is not a suitable guardian for a traumatized child." The court-appointed lawyer smirked, seeing a glimmer of hope to at least send the girl to foster care, a final spiteful win for his client. "I can find work," Arthur said, his voice steady. "I can fix anything." "That's not enough, Mr. Vance. The state requires stability, background, history. Your file is a black hole. I cannot grant custody to a ghost." The gavel was raised, poised to strike down Arthur's world. "If it pleases the court," a deep, authoritative voice boomed from the back of the room. The double doors swung open. A man in a pristine army dress blue uniform stepped inside. 4 stars glistened on his shoulders. He was followed by 2 aides carrying thick, leather-bound briefcases. The bailiff moved to intercept, but the general simply held up a hand. The room fell into a stunned silence. "General Sheffield?" the judge asked, her eyes widening. "To what do we owe this intrusion?" "I'm here to correct a clerical error regarding the defendant's employment history," the general said, walking to the bench. He placed a briefcase on the judge's desk and unlocked it. He pulled out a file stamped with red ink, declassified. "Arthur Vance is not a drifter, Your Honor. He is a retired colonel of the United States Special Forces, a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars, and the Purple Heart." Arthur didn't turn around. He stared at the table, his jaw set. "The reason his financial and employment records appear empty," the general continued, his voice filling the room, "is because his service was classified under Title V Covert Action Authority. He wasn't unemployed. He was serving his country in places we don't talk about." The general turned to look at Arthur. "And regarding his pension, there was a glitch in the disbursement system when he went off-grid. That has been rectified. Mr. Vance has accumulated back pay of 6 years. He is not destitute. He is quite comfortable." The judge opened the file. She read the citations. She looked at the photos of a younger Arthur, weary and dusted with sand, receiving a medal from the president. She looked up at the man in the flannel shirt who'd scrubbed grease from his fingernails for years just to stay close to a little girl. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice softer, almost reverent, "is this true?" "I just wanted to be her dad, Your Honor. The rest was a different life."
A life that saved many, including, it seems, this little girl. The judge closed the file. She looked at the empty chair where Marcus should have been. Then she looked at the court-appointed lawyer. "Does the defense have any objections?" she asked dryly. The lawyer closed his briefcase. "No, Your Honor, no objections." "Then it is the ruling of this court," the hammer slammed down with a sound that felt like liberation, "that full, sole, and permanent legal custody of Lily Sterling be awarded to Arthur Vance, effective immediately." Lily, hearing her name and the tone of the hammer, looked up. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the smile on Arthur's face as he turned around. It was the first real smile she had seen on him in years. Arthur walked past the general. He didn't salute, he just nodded. "You're loud, Sheffield." "You're welcome, Colonel," the general replied quietly. "Don't make me come back here." Arthur walked to the bench. "Ready to go home, Bug?" "To the garage?" "No," Arthur said, picking her up. "We're going to get a real house, with a yard and a dog, a real dog." The farmhouse sat on 5 acres of rolling green hills in Oregon, far removed from the steel and concrete of the city. It was a place of healing. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a stark contrast to the antiseptic sting of the hospital or the metallic tang of the airfield. Arthur knelt in the grass, tightening the final bolt of a wooden porch swing he had built from scratch. His hands, once weapons of war, moved with the gentle deliberation of a craftsman. He wore a simple white t-shirt, revealing the faint map of scars on his arms, stories of a life he had finally left behind. "Is it safe?" a voice chirped from the screen door. Arthur looked up. Lily stood there holding 2 glasses of lemonade. The terror that had haunted her eyes for months was gone, replaced by the bright, mischievous spark of a normal 7-year-old. The scar on her chest was still there, a thin white line peeking out from her collar, but it was no longer a wound. It was a mark of survival.
"Structural integrity is at 100%, Arthur said, wiping his brow. "Come test it out." Lily ran barefoot across the grass and hopped onto the swing. Arthur sat beside her, the chains groaning softly as they took his weight. They swung in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip below the tree line, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and gold. "Do you miss it?" Lily asked suddenly, looking at her feet. "Miss what, Bug?" "Being a ghost? The general said you were a ghost." Arthur took a sip of the lemonade. It was too sour, just the way she liked it. "No, ghosts are lonely. They don't have front porches, and they definitely don't have lemonade." Lily reached into her pocket. She pulled out something small, wrapped in crinkled notebook paper. She held it out to him with solemn importance. "I made this for you, since you put your other medals away in the box." Arthur took the package. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a bracelet woven from colorful plastic beads, purple, green, and neon orange. In the center, dangling from a piece of fishing line, was the blue cap of a ballpoint pen. Arthur stared at it. The breath caught in his throat. It was the cap of the pen he had used on the highway. She had kept it. "It's a Medal of Honor," Lily explained seriously, "for saving me, and for fixing the crayons, and for not letting the bad man take me to the snow place." Arthur felt a burning behind his eyes that he hadn't felt in 20 years. He had received the Distinguished Service Cross from a president in a room full of applause, and he had felt nothing but duty. Holding this plastic bracelet, he felt a weight of gratitude that nearly crushed him. He slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. It was tight, pinching his skin, clashing horribly with his watch. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever worn. "I accept this commission," Arthur whispered, his voice thick. Lily scooted closer on the swing, leaning her head against his arm. She traced the scars on his forearm with her finger.
Arthur? Yeah, Bug? Can I call you Dad now? The world seemed to stop. The wind in the trees, the distant call of a hawk, the creak of the swing, it all fell away. For years, Arthur had been a man of many names: Colonel, Ghost, Asset, Vance. He had been a weapon to be deployed and a problem to be solved. He had been faceless, defined only by his utility. But in that single syllable, he was given a face. He was given a definition that no government file could redact. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. He kissed the top of her head, smelling the peppermint shampoo. "Yeah, Lily," he said, a tear finally escaping and tracking through the dust on his cheek. "You can call me Dad." The sun finally vanished behind the hills, leaving them in the twilight. But there was no darkness at the farmhouse. The porch light flickered on, a warm yellow beacon against the coming night. Arthur Vance, the man who had walked through fire, sat swinging in the cool breeze, finally and completely at peace. He wasn't a stepdad anymore. He was the father who stayed.